So Gorbachev also has an effect on Eastern Europe as well, not just in the Soviet Union, because in the late 1980s, he he had made pronouncements that nations shouldn't interfere with other nations' political changes in a military way. And this is something the Soviet Union had done in Eastern Europe since the end of the war. They had interfered in '56. They interfered in 1968 in Czechoslovakia. They interfered with the Polish martial law by helping out. So there's this long history that if revolution happens in Eastern Europe, then the Soviet Union will come in and clamp it down, crush it. So this announcement kind of sends shockwaves through the area as well. That hey, this might be a time for change because the Soviet Union doesn't want to get involved now. Maybe under Gorbachev. But it's still unclear. Like some people want to say, look, it's Gorbachev, and this is why it all happened. Like I said, there's so many different forces, and it's hard to say how they interplayed. And each nation has a different history with the fall as well. So again, let's not be simplistic. It definitely does have an effect, though, and it can be argued on how great an effect it happens with Gorbachev's new policies, at least announced policies in Eastern Europe. So. In 1988 and early 1989, again, there are those who are forcing change in Poland. Again, those happenings are occurring, and there's youth movements, and it seems that it's not going to last. Like it's not going to hold together. And again, prices interfere with a lot of this activity, and some people felt that martial law could never happen again, like it had happened in the early 1980s. That they would, it was just, unless the Soviet Union was to come in, it would be the Polish internal will to crush their people again, wasn't going to happen again. And in early 1989, talks are established with the government and dissident leaders of the dissident movement. Lech Walesa ends up being part of this talk, and they had what they called round table talks, talking about economic reform and political liberalization and such. And unbelievably, it worked. And in 1989, the government basically had lost its will to keep on going the way it was happening. And in some ways, just threw their hands up to the changes. And it wasn't done, with the barrel of a gun. And what happened in Poland sends this ripple effect throughout Eastern Europe. If Poland can do it, then these underground movements in other places might have the same kind of change. So in June of 1989, Poland has its first free elections. And unbelievably, the world is not paying attention as usual. It is the biggest happening in European history, in that past 50-year mark since World War II. The free elections was going to happen somewhere in Eastern Europe, but on the same day that that was happening in Poland, there's also a ripple effect in the rest of the world. In Tiananmen Square in China, protesters go against the Chinese government, and the tanks literally roll over people, some of the protesters. And some people, they were looking to what was happening in Poland. So we forget how this region and these revolutions had widespread effects. And even on the day of their celebration, the world has moved on already to other revolutions. That's going to be crushed, however. In that same month, in June of 1989, in Hungary, they announced they're going to have the state funeral of Imre Nagy, the leader of the '56 revolution. And this in itself was revolutionary because it's saying that by having a state funeral and to reinter Imre Nagy was to say that there was justification in his revolution or being the leader of that revolution in '56. So again, the government is saying to itself that we don't have the political will to continue anymore. We're going to give up this ruse that we have been saying all along, that was a counter-revolution and it didn't have any legitimacy. by reinterring Imre Nagy, the government is saying that was legitimate, that there was a need for democratic reforms. So again, it's like the will of the government just kind of petered out, and the changes are allowed to occur. And the leader, in 1988, János Kadar, the man who had taken over Nagy's position and been basically a puppet for so many years, he had stepped down in 88, and he's able to, he watches basically all that he had fought for just disappear overnight, really, by that burial. So that's the key event, really, in Hungary, the reburial of Imre Nagy, the leader who had been executed from 56. And again, so these revolutions kind of spread in different ways. In Czechoslovakia, in Prague, there are some youth protests, and that seems to be the main event. Although there are leaders of the old dissident movement who kind of take the leadership position. So it seems that the youth make it happen, and then the old leaders, those old dissident leaders, come into power, and that's kind of the pattern that is followed in these areas. And the stories are different in different areas. There is a reemergence of the old Baltic nations that had first appeared after World War I. If you remember, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, those three Baltic nations, were independent nations following World War I. On August 23rd, 1939, the Soviet Union had retaken these areas. Basically, they had written them off through the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, that was going to be the end of their independence. They'd be back under the Soviet fold. Well, on August 23rd, 1989, 60 years later, the people of the Baltics had basically a chance to protest what had happened in 1939. So it was passed by word of mouth that they would have, they would hold hands. They'd make a human chain across the Baltic region, and over 1 million people held hands on August 23rd. They called this the Baltic Way, and protest. They said nothing. There was no signs. It wasn't about people banging their fists against the government. It was this amazing political protest where people quietly held hands across the whole region in protest what happened 60 years before, where they lost their independence. And other things were happening in places like Estonia, another one of the Baltic nations. They were having what they called the singing revolution. That same summer, they had these things called song festivals in Estonia, and they had this ancient tradition where people sing in unison. But the songs had been dictated for the last 60 years, songs in support of the socialist government. New songs had been incorporated into the song festival, so where stadiums of people would sing in unison together. Well, on the song festivals of 1989, the Estonians broke out spontaneously into the old nationalist songs of the 1930s and 20s of Estonia, the national songs of Estonia. And again, how are you supposed to protest this? You have a stadium full of people that you've organized and you think you have political control over, but suddenly you have a whole stadium of people singing. Who do you start beating, right? There's too many people. And these song festivals start off very small, but they start to spread throughout Estonia. A new movie has just been released about this called The Singing Revolution. It's a foreign film in Estonian, but with now English subtitles. They were showing this past summer in America, and now it's been released to DVD. I hope you get a chance to see it, about this type of protest. So again, each region has a different way that it happens, and we can't say, in this country this was the cause, in this country this was the cause. We're not sure, and something's going to be studied for many years to come. But we know that there's alternative movements here, singing as a revolution, holding hands as a revolution, having weird dances in the street as a revolution. It's a strange and miraculous time in many ways. And people call 89 Annus Mirabilis, which means the year of miracles, because it came in many ways as a big surprise to the West. But it's a very interesting part of European history that still needs close inspection. My last part I'll talk about is what happened in the Soviet Union those same years.